Welcome to Ordinary Discipleship with Jessie Cruickshank. My name is Chris. With me is Jacob. And today we are getting together to talk about discipleship. But if you're a pastor out there, you need to listen up. If you're a layperson up there, you need to listen up. Why, you ask? Because today we're going to answer the question that so many pastors have, and they feel, Jessie, you've felt this before. You've been part of a church where it feels like the pressure of discipleship all comes down to you.
Right, because everybody's saying, no, you need to do this, you need to do this. And to be honest, most people don't even know what you're talking about.
Right.
Right? I think if most people who are following Jesus were say, yeah, I believe we're supposed to make disciples.
Man,
Who's supposed to make disciples?
who's doing that?
What does that look like? What do you even mean?
Are we having a potluck?
Right? So
What's going on?
I have a faith, we had a community gathering in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Of people of faith who were all different theology streams and denominations. They just, their churches were too far away to do like small group. So they still wanted that kind of an atmosphere. And so we started hosting this community faith
Just right there in your neighborhood.
gathering. In my home, we would eat dinner.
Wow.
And I was working on the Ordinary Discipleship book, and I was kind of running into some interesting things. Like, I think I'm assuming something that I shouldn't be assuming. And I asked everybody in the room to go around and define what they thought discipleship was.
Ah.
And they were all these very different answers. So the guy who was Catholic, it was catechism, right?
Yeah.
It was discipleship was the classes that I go through until I'm, age 8, and then I get
Then I'm
confirmed and
done.
I graduate,
Yeah, right.
Like, I would love to graduate from something at the age of 8. That's not a subtweet on
Yeah, no,
Catholicism, by the
I
way.
got you.
Another person in the room thought it was evangelism, right? So then discipleship was becoming a convert into Christianity, and then you're there. And they had a Reformed background, so there was just some of that understanding. And then another person thought discipleship was, well, aren't I just like telling and praying with the person in the grocery store? Like, isn't that discipleship? And so they all had these very different ideas of what it meant what discipleship was, what that looked like, which was fascinating because I was assuming that everybody knew that it was just helping somebody be changed by Jesus. Like, wherever, whatever, whomever, whenever, however long, like, if I'm going to come alongside you and help you be changed by Jesus, that's discipleship. Of course, everybody had that same definition in their mind, right?
Well, you bring up an interesting point that a lot of denominations treat it like it's almost like a program that you complete, right? That whether it's confirmation or catechism.
Or bases. Or
correct.
Classes,
or we talked about
member
Awana,
class.
and you're making steps. Whereas I think we could agree that discipleship is a lifelong process that you don't graduate from, right?
Which creates then that question, wait, I'm still supposed to be doing this?
Right.
Who am I doing this? Wait, what? I can't disciple. Who am I supposed to disciple?
It's funny. I thought about this story when you were talking about graduating, right? And I was working on this family to come to church for like 6 months. On Christmas Eve, they came. I was so pumped. Like, they had no church home. They came, and the guy's got a Southern accent, and he goes, "Yeah, that was good. That was good." I'm like, "Coming back next week?" He goes, "Nah, we got our church in this week. We'll see. Maybe next Christmas." It's like, God, come on, man. Like, they made the steps. They did the thing. They checked the checkbox. And
right.
sometimes
Christmas is important.
Right. But sometimes people feel like that discipleship is the checkbox or whatever, right? Like, it's not just being changed by Jesus, but it's a process that we said, oh, yeah, we're done.
Right. I'm good. I'm converted.
I'm done. Yeah.
Whatever.
I went to Christmas once. It's good. So you talked a little bit about how it feels, and that's a really interesting perspective to get a bunch of different people from different faith walks in a room and ask that question, something you've been studying for a long time. And so you said that there was some other stories of people there. Can you think of any of those stories, like where people were talking about what it means to be a disciple?
Yeah, for them it was around, well, what am I learning? What is my church history? What are my doctrinal points?
Gotcha.
and it was this very school-based thing. And so for me, as part of the leadership of the house church, it's a faith gathering. It's not a house church. I don't even know what we would call it.
Right.
Neighborhood faith gathering. You know, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. If they each have this different idea of discipleship, how am I supposed to disciple them?
Correct.
Right? Because, I mean, I love the person who was Catholic, and we did communion as part of our thing, but he didn't participate, which was totally fine because I wasn't an ordained priest in Catholicism, therefore able to administer communion to him. Everybody was cool with it. He just didn't participate. No feelings were hurt.
Right.
But I'm thinking, wait a minute, they have different practices than I do. They have different belief systems and ideas. Like, we all love God, but maybe we even think God differently about God. How am I supposed to disciple them if I feel like that's the point of this neighborhood gathering? And it led me to this place where I was like, okay, there are some people in this group who we have similar enough idea about what God is doing. And that's not even the right way to say it. We have a similar enough idea about what we want next from God, or what the question is that we're asking from God, you know, where we were in the journey. And I could disciple that person. But for the other people in the room whose journey was just different, and the only place we intersected was we gathered in my house once a month.
Right.
Like, I couldn't necessarily disciple them, right? I wasn't the right guide for their journey. They were in, you know, I was guiding rock climbing and they were like surfing, you know, like I wasn't the right person for that. And there was no harm or feelings hurt in that. It was actually a really amazing revelation to say, you know what, I actually can't disciple these people. I think that's okay.
Yeah. And it's interesting, Jacob, you've been a pastor of a church that's growing from the point where how long have you been?
Oh gosh, 8 or 9 years.
8 or 9 years. Yeah. And so I'm sure you've struggled with this as well. And the idea that discipleship kind of falls on, I think most pastors would agree, they feel that it falls on their shoulders to do discipleship. But we were talking earlier that really every person can be disciple makers.
Well, and I think, and I think what I like, I think a lot of times, like if you're in a more institutional setting rather than like a neighborhood faith gathering, it's not so much that people might have different understandings of discipleship, but I think the bigger issue is just a capacity issue.
What do you mean by that?
So what I mean is that, like, if people, when people are a part of a faith organization, like a church with a building and a service and a service time, they're assuming that the pastor will do the discipleship, will do the disciple making, I should say, the discipling of people. And very often the people, assume that, and the pastor assumes that. And I think like that's very much like people go into occupational ministry saying, I like discipling people. I like teaching the Bible. And so there becomes this assumption that, 80% of churches in America are under 200. I think I'm even being conservative on that.
Yeah, it's about 100 by now.
Yeah. So that means most of these churches have a sole pastor, one staff person.
Yeah.
And those 50 to 150 people all think that one person should be their discipler, and that person thinks that they should be discipling that 50 to 150 people. And when you're sitting in that position, you can start to say like, well, gosh, I just don't have the time. So capacity issue. I don't have the time to disciple all these people. I don't have the energy to disciple all these people.
Because you're probably also bivocational, right? You probably also have a job because the church isn't big enough to give you enough income for that time. Right. So you have a 20 to 40 hour a week.
Well, and I'm sure a lot of people
that.
listening to this are bivocational as well. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's where you're going next. That's why around Whoology, we talk about every person disciple making. And Jesse, you were saying, usually when we say, I can't, the answer is, well, God didn't intend you to.
Usually.
Yes. So if I'm saying I can't disciple everyone, you would say, well, God didn't intend you to, right?
But in a previous episode, you said in the hero's journey that every hero says no in the beginning anyway.
I know, right? That's the great dilemma. Is that like, is my resistance my fallenness that is supposed to be overcome, or is my resistance God actually resisting me? And it's always my biggest question.
Yeah.
And the answer to both is give up and just ask God to do something.
I had an interesting thing happen. There was a guy that was working at the church. He was a young guy, and I had recently just started getting deeper in my faith. This was 20 years ago, and he came up to me and he said, "Man, I really respect you. I appreciate you. Will you mentor me?" And I didn't even know what that meant at that point. Like, I went home and like I'm Googling, what does a mentor do? Like. And I know that we're going to talk in the next episode about not feeling equipped, but I like what you say so much about like how you have been pushed to you have to have God in your life in order to achieve what you're about to attempt, right? Like, you've never felt like you've been fully equipped for any position
Never.
in your life. So when somebody comes and they say to you, everybody can be a disciple maker. Like, practically, what does that look like?
I think if we can right size the expectation,
Okay.
like we have to start there, because if you are a person with a 40-hour, let's say you're the pastor of a church, or you even have a small group. I mean, honestly, like 10 to 20 people that the agreement and the understanding in the group is that one person is discipling, a herd of humans. Like, that's an unrealistic expectation. I can only disciple 3 people. I have a full-time job. Jesus worked on 12, struggled with at least one for whatever reasons we want to put into there. And they lived together for 3 years. Okay, so I'm not living with you. Love you guys. No, my husband's super introverted. It's not going to happen. Even though we did do that for a season of our marriage.
Well,
we
there
had
goes
people
that
live with
boot
us.
camp, the
Because
discipleship.
10 years we had people live with us.
Oh, wow.
But like, okay, so 3. So if I think of the 1 to 5, 1 to 3 ratio as what is sustainably reasonable for a mentorship, in-depth discipleship relationship, well, how many people that means in the small group of 30, you need 10 people doing that. Okay, so that's a terrifying number if you're a pastor or a small group leader. You're like, where am I going to find 10 people to do this?
Yeah, right.
But I think if we can right-size the expectation that we are just sharing what heaven has showed us, we are just sharing what God has taught us. We are helping other people see God the way that we see him and sharing that, and then helping them see God and experience God the way that God has designed them to be experiencing God. Like, we can just, it's not about all of this, theology. I have this conviction that there are no tests in heaven, right? There's no theology tests. There's no, like, did you believe the right things? Peter's not going to ask you that question at the gate that you're going to like pass fail, and it's some sort of, super theology,
Right.
Did you read the Bible deep enough kind of question. So instead, we can say, okay, I just need to live the best life a follower of Jesus that I am, and I'm going to encourage you and help you do that as well. Then 3 people seems more reasonable, and like I can do it. And then we realize, oh wow, if it's only that, then actually everybody can, right? I think that a teenager can make a disciple. I think that a person who has any kind of job or any kind of neurodivergent person can actually make a disciple, because all you're doing is sharing what Jesus means to you and what heaven has shown you, and helping them experience that kind of thing for themselves. So, which means I think we have all kinds of disciple makers, because there are all kinds of people. Because I'm going to respond to your story that I may not respond to Jacob's story. Jacob isn't funny enough all the time for me. And like, okay, not really, but like, I'm going to be drawn to a different kind of personality.
Right.
And so we need all the personalities making disciples, because the whole world is full of all kinds of personalities.
But I'm sorry, relationships are super hard. And discipleship is messy.
Yes.
Like, it is super messy because relationships are so, I just told my 12th grade theology class, there's nothing harder that you'll do in this lifetime than maintain a healthy relationship, because it takes a lot of work. And discipleship, of course, is ultimately at its core a relationship around each other and with God, like being formed into being Christ-like. But Jacob, you were going to...
let me
sorry.
say, just
Yeah.
because the point is, love you, Jacob.
You're great.
Is that
If you're
we're
just
not-
listening to us, we've been tapping Jake's leg and telling him we got something else. So go ahead.
is that Where there are not theology quizzes in heaven,
Yeah.
the accountability is how did we love? Not
Oh.
what did we believe, not what did we know, but how did we love?
Mm.
And so it's messy because that is the actual point.
Well said. Jake, do you have anything to add?
Well, what was connecting for me was I think in order to be able to say every person can make a disciple, you do have to go back to that original conversation you had with the faith community in your home. Because if discipleship is teaching catechism, well, no, not everybody can make a disciple.
Right.
If discipleship is doing in-depth exegetical Bible study, then no, not everybody can make a disciple. But that's why I think the definitions are so helpful.
Agreed.
Of being discipled is being changed by Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Making a disciple is helping somebody else be changed by Jesus. And that's what you're talking about with simply sharing your story. We don't actually mean just tell your testimony. You can't just stand up and tell your testimony and somebody's discipled. You actually have to walk with them, and that's what Chris is saying. You have to walk with them and step for step help that person walk the same journey that you've walked before. One of my favorite pictures of ministry is in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Mm.
Yes.
Oh, I love this movie. Go.
Yes,
I
he's
don't know
going
this
through
story.
this like booby-trapped cave on the way to the Holy Grail.
Dr. Jones is a booby trap.
Yes, and he gets to this wide cavern, and when you're standing on the one side of the cavern, you cannot see that there's a bridge across. And I always wondered as a little kid, like, did they just mess up the special effects because the camera moves and you see there's a bridge? I'm like, did they just mess up the special effects? I'm, oh no, the point is that there was a bridge there.
Yeah.
But he couldn't see it, and he had to step out and walk on that bridge. And so this was Indy's.
Only in the leap from the lion's
Yes,
mouth will
yes.
he
Yes.
prove his word.
Yes. And so
Well
he
played.
takes that leap of faith, and then he gets the other side. And now the Nazis are coming behind him, I think. But he's got to give a path for somebody else. And so what he does is he takes some rock and sand and throws it back over that bridge so that the next person who's coming can see that there's a bridge there. Because the rock and the sand rests on that bridge that you can't see unless there's something on it. And so to me, that's always been a beautiful picture of ministry is I've walked this bridge before. Let me light a path so that when you come behind me, it's not so scary. And I think that's what we mean when we say everybody can make a disciple is you don't have to teach an exegetical Bible study. You don't have to run a catechism class. You just have to give testimony of the goodness of God and let God do what God's going to do in that person's life.
And hope that they're not going to come kill you.
Right.
Right.
right. You're like
Exactly.
Indiana Jones. Yeah.
Well played on the Indiana
my
Jones
favorite-
story.
one of my favorite
Plus 3 points for
references, yeah.
Jacob. That was great. So the point is that everybody can make disciples. And Jesse, I love how you broke that down. It doesn't have to be hard. And so I do have a question, and this isn't on the script. So I think a lot of pastors out there, they are actively discipling people. But one thing that a lot of them are not doing are being actively discipled.
Yeah.
Can you speak on that a little bit of how important that can be to that process?
Yeah. So one of my dear colleagues, Dan White Jr., kind of has some data around this. It's a little anecdotal, and probably somebody at some point, Barna or Lifeway, hint, should, maybe test this quantitatively. But in his surveying of hundreds of pastors, he's found that only about 11% have actually been discipled by a living person.
Wow.
And so let me clarify the words that I use there. One, that's a person. It's not a book, right? It's a human.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's living. You're not being discipled by somebody who's dead, like Augustine.
Right.
So
that's my disciple, Augustine.
Right.
Yeah,
because
right.
when we make discipleship teaching and teaching and disciple making are different, right? So teaching is, I can read Augustine. I can read somebody who is passed away. I can read somebody who's living, but I only know them through their book. That's teaching. Disciple making requires relationship and being able to ask the follow-up question. So St. Augustine cannot ask me a follow-up question about what I'm learning from God by reading his writings, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, if he does, that's super weird, and you guys should check on me. So, but neither can a person who's alive, but I don't have relationship with. They can't follow up with me. They can't ask me how I'm applying that to my life. And so when we understand that teaching and disciple making are different, then as a pastor, I I can't just be studying. I can't just be reading books. As amazing as there are books out there, I actually have to have somebody in my life calling me on my crap. I have to have somebody in my life who is asking me the question and seeing the incongruities in my life, being like, oh, well, you say this, but you're behaving this way. Or, hey, you say you believe something, but I see you processing the situation in your church that is not the same way that you believe. Hey, remember what you believe. Like the most frustrating conversations I have with people I disciple are because I'm a very vulnerable person, and I believe that a good amount of leading and disciple making is modeling. So I model my relationship with God. I model I expose my fears, my struggles, the conversations I'm having with God. And when the person I'm discipling says back to me the thing I've taught them, it is my most frustrating and my most proud moments.
But why is it frustrating?
She wants credit.
No, no, it's frustrating because like, oh yeah, I actually knew that answer.
Oh.
Yeah,
and
so
I
you
just
mean
was
when they
blinded to it.
What you're saying, when they reflect it back to you because you've forgotten to adhere to it.
Right.
Gotcha.
Right.
And I think that goes back to your original question, because the question was, talk about the importance of the disciple maker being discipled.
Yes.
And again, if we say that being discipled is being changed by Jesus, and disciple making is helping others be changed by Jesus too. If there's ever a time in my life when I no longer allow Jesus to change me, then yeah, I'm going to get passed by. And that's what's happening in that conversation. Like if in that area, I'm beginning to resist God changing me, it might even be that the person I've discipled is coming up next to me and going, remember this thing? And that's jolting you out to go, oh, that's right. I need to continue to grow into who God has me being.
Yep.
Thanks.
And that same lesson applies in this, or that same wisdom applies in this moment. And I forgot it. But it's also my proudest moment because one, they were listening, which is also awesome.
Right.
Two, like they're discipling me back, which means they're ready to be a disciple maker, right? When your kids are grown up enough that they start to remind you who you are and lead you back, like, or pay for stuff, like all of those things are beautiful moments. So when the person I'm discipling disciples me back, oh, I feel like I did such a good job raising them for whatever that season was, right? It's beautiful. So as a pastor, if you don't get to experience that, like my heart really hurts for you.
Yeah.
If you don't think that you need that, if you don't think that there's wisdom in that because you have to keep yourself hidden and your life hidden, then my heart hurts for you because there's something so much more beautiful. So find somebody who you trust enough that they can roll their eyes at you and you still respect them and are willing to be seen by them.
Great point. Hey, I'm going to throw something at you. This is a brand new segment here on the Ordinary Discipleship podcast. We're going to wrap it up with the final point of the day. Jacob, I'm going to head to you first. What do you say to a pastor, make it your elevator speech to a pastor who says, Jacob, I just can't disciple everyone. Bring it back home. Give it to him, Jakey.
Well, I mean, I think we say you weren't meant to. Okay. Because everybody is meant to make disciples. And so you're reaching the end. You saying I can't do it all is exactly the thing you should say because everybody should be discipling one another.
Okay. What's your take, Jessie?
I think Jakey did great. Mostly because he survived being called Jakey.
I know. I'm sure after this podcast, I'm going to get, please don't call me Jakey anymore.
Side notes, right?
That's
the show
fine.
notes
Jacob.
are Jacob.
And refer to him as Jacob. What's your Twitter handle, Jacob? You got none?
I don't do Twitter.
You don't do Twitter?
No.
Oh,
You an
that's too
Instagram guy?
I have an Instagram handle. I don't check it very often.
No.
But
you don't use any social media, huh?
I use the Facebook like an old person.
Jesse, you use Twitter.
I do. Twitter and Instagram.
Give them your Twitter handle. Let's get some
Your
followers.
Brain by Jess.
Your Brain by Jess.
Both.
That's a lot easier than your last name.
That's why she did that.
That's smart. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us with the Ordinary Discipleship podcast. We hope that if this has been helpful for you, that you would go on to iTunes, like it, subscribe, tell a friend, and we'll see you next time. God bless. Bye-bye.